All right, I'm privileged to be joined today by Steve Lansdale. He is the publisher of ponyfans.com. I believe, Steve, it's got to be the oldest website dedicated to SMU athletics. How long have you been the publisher of Pony Fans?
I took it over in 1999. It was started by a former player and one of his buddies from school, and I started writing for them. And when they graduated, they handed it off to me, and I've never let go. It's an awful lot of fun to do.
Awesome. I think we kind of share the same timeline. I started my site. My site origins can be dated back to 1999, and it's gone through a couple iterations, but it's been with rivals for, I guess, the current rivals since 2001. And I remember looking at Pony Fans through the years because it was, before there was social media with Twitter and all that stuff, it was always about message boards. And I'd always kind of, know where certain message boards were. And I always remember Pony Fans probably going back 20 years. So that's really cool. But obviously a big game coming up on Wednesday between UCF and SMU. It's the American Athletic Conference opener for both schools. At one point, we thought the game was going to be this past weekend. First was going to be on Saturday at 3:30. Then Hurricane Ian had its sights set on Florida, so they postponed it one day to Sunday at 1 o'clock is what was initially announced. Steve, I had doubts. You probably had doubts the game was going to happen when we saw where the storm was heading. And so then I wasn't really surprised. On Friday, when a lot of people still didn't have power and we're all dealing with flooding over here in Central Florida, they finally announced, no, we're not going to try to play this weekend. It's pretty much impossible. We're going to move the game to Wednesday night at 7 o'clock, which obviously works because both teams have a bye week, or we're going to have a bye week this upcoming Saturday. So, Steve, as someone who obviously covers SMU, what did that kind of do to the preparations? I know you were over at SMU practice on Sunday talking to head coach Rhett Lashlee. Did that kind of allow SMU more prep time? Did they take a couple of days off? Do you kind of know how the start and stop and kind of worked out the last few days?
Yeah, we talked to Coach Lashley about this on Sunday, and he didn't really change up his schedule for preparation by having the extra 3 or 4 days, other than the fact that he gave his guys a couple of more days off to rest. They've been studying UCF. He obviously has a great familiarity with Gus Malzahn and everything he likes to do because Coach Lashley played for Coach Malzahn. But SMU is pretty beaten up right now physically. And more than anything, they needed to get off their feet. They needed to get in the training room. There are just a lot of guys with, the bumps and bruises that you get over the course of any season. And coaches, I think by definition are or by rule are creatures of habit. And he would love to have had his normal routine, but Coach Lashley and everybody at SMU certainly understand that what everybody in Florida has been dealing with for the last week is far more important than any game. So, allowing everybody in Orlando and the state of Florida the extra time to try to begin the rebuilding
Right.
process down there is more important than anything. And at the same time, it allowed him a couple more days to get his guys off their feet, get a little extra rest, because he knows they are in for a very tough battle Wednesday night in Orlando.
Yeah, it's obviously a big game for both schools. To kind of recap SMU's early season, they're 2-2 in non-conference play. Like UCF, first 4 games were out of conference. Opened the season with the 48-10 win against North Texas. Second weekend, they beat FCS Lamar 45-16. Went on the road to Maryland and lost a 34-27 game. And then last week, it was the battle for the Iron Skillet, which is the longtime rivalry game with TCU, which means a little bit more in this matchup because that's where former SMU coach Sonny Dykes left this past offseason to head across town and went over to Fort Worth to coach TCU, and TCU ended up victorious 42-34. Steve, can you kind of tell me a little bit about that game and that atmosphere? Because, you don't usually see that when a coach leaves a school and then comes back the next season necessarily, and especially in a rivalry situation like that. Just kind of talk to me about that atmosphere. What was that like seeing Sonny Dykes come back to the hilltop?
Well, I've been covering SMU since before the birth of this website. I started covering SMU in '89, so this is my 34th year. I have
Okay.
never gotten more. I've never gotten more phone calls about access to tickets than I did for the TCU game. Um, there's a long-standing rivalry, obviously, with
Right.
TCU. They're both private schools. They're about 30 miles apart. They traditionally have recruited all the same guys. Um, a lot of the same kids, a lot of the same players have SMU and TCU on their list of schools they consider. So they compete on the field, they compete off the field. They're both good academic schools. And then, yes, obviously, the element of Sonny Dykes leaving SMU to go across town to TCU, as you can imagine, did not sit well with a lot of SMU fans. If he had gone almost anywhere else, I think, the fans would have sort of shrugged and said, okay, he won a lot of games at SMU. That's a normal progression. You get jobs when you win, or you get job offers when you win. But to go to TCU certainly did not sit well. And so let's just say he wasn't greeted very warmly when he took the field with the team. Um, there were I talked to fans who said they would be more than happy with SMU going 1-11 if they beat that one, if they got that one in the TCU game. There is no love lost between the fans of these two schools. Honestly, I was a little surprised that the behavior in the crowd was better than I anticipated. Um, it was broiling hot.
Yeah.
It got up to 96 or something like that, and it was about 110 on the field. And it was, it's a good old fashioned slugfest between two teams that don't like each other a whole lot, um, and it was quite a day.
Yeah. So, how did when that transition took place last year, and SMU hires Rhett Lashlee? Was that sort of the candidate that a lot of people had in mind? Obviously, he had been offensive coordinator under Sonny Dykes for a couple years prior to him moving on to Miami. Was that a name that everyone figured would be in the mix? I don't know if Sonny Dykes had any input, probably not, but would that been a move he would have endorsed? Kind of talk about that move last year, hiring Rhett Lashlee.
Yeah, I think everybody assumed that Coach Lashlee would be one of the candidates. And Sonny Dykes has come out and said that he endorsed Rhett Lashlee as his replacement. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. I wasn't in any of those conversations. Rhett Lashlee was a terrific offensive coordinator. He made the SMU offense better than it's been in 30 years. And he is, I think, less predictable as far as play calling than his successor, Garrett Riley, who followed Sonny Dykes over to TCU. He is a creative, aggressive play caller. His offense will look a lot like Gus Malzahn's in many ways. Obviously, he certainly learned a lot from Coach Malzahn, and I think he was on the short list right away. I don't know how many candidates Rick Hart, the athletic director, really considered, but certainly Rhett Lashlee's name was on that list from the minute he started the search, and it didn't take very long before they narrowed it down. And I think most of the SMU community welcomed Coach Lashlee back. He didn't have the head coaching experience, but he certainly put up terrific numbers as the head coach, as the offensive coordinator at SMU, at Miami for the last 2 years. Previously, he was the OC at Auburn when they won a national title. I mean, his resume was sparkling, and he certainly deserved the shot.
Yeah, we thought, I think people thought he might have been on UCF's short list when they were hiring ultimately Gus Malzahn and everything. Obviously, and you mentioned there's so many to say he's part of the Gus Malzahn coaching tree might be selling it short because there's so many ties. He was Gus Malzahn's high school quarterback at Shiloh Christian High School in Springdale, Arkansas. I think back in the mid to late '90s, and he was with Gus pretty much everywhere. And so, fairly recently had coached with Gus I think he was at Arkansas briefly, obviously at Auburn, had been a lot of Arkansas State when Gus was there briefly. So this is an important game, obviously, because it's the conference opener. Both teams need to win, but it's a very special game as well, I take it, for Rhett, kind of, going up against, his mentor and kind of the coach that molded him. I know you talked to him on Sunday. What do you think this game means to him, now being a head coach and facing, his former coach?
I think it means the world to him. This is the second week in a row that Rhett Lashlee is coaching against an opposing coach who had a huge part in his development. Because last week he coached against Sonny Dykes, who obviously brought him to Dallas a few years ago as an offensive coordinator. But his relationship with Gus Malzahn is different. Like you said, he's known him a long, long time. And he absolutely thinks the world of Gus Malzahn. And you saw the interview we did with Coach Lashlee on Sunday. He reached out and talked to Gus Malzahn after the storm hit you guys down there. And the conversation had nothing to do with football. It was all about how's your home, how's your family, how are your players, your assistant coaches, how's the campus. It was all about his well-being, and they have a personal relationship that transcends their football relationship. And but that said, he knows that Gus Malzahn is revered as an outstanding coach, and deservedly so. And it would be a huge, huge accomplishment for Coach Lashlee if he could help his team beat a team coached by one of his absolute mentors.
Right. Go back real quick about the TCU series. I know this game has been played every year. I forgot to ask this a minute ago. Is this series, the Iron Skillet, is it going to continue on in the future? I know we heard about Bedlam. I know there's a conference change going on with that, with Oklahoma State and Oklahoma, how that series may not be played anymore. I looked at future schedules. It looked like it's scheduled through 24. Is this rivalry safe between TCU and SMU?
I don't know. Ask me next week, next month, next year. At the moment, like you said, it is scheduled for another couple of years. I hope they play it forever. Because even when this game has been lopsided in one direction or the other, it is a game with a lot of intensity. It's a game with a lot of emotion. The fans of the winning team strut out of there like they just won the national championship, and the fans of the other team walk out like they're going to a funeral. It's the team you love to beat. And so I'm a big fan of rivalries, and I hope it continues forever. But as you said, the landscape of college athletics seems to change every day. So if there's realignment, if there's scheduling changes, if TV partners change, who knows what happens in the future. But I think for at least the next couple of years, we get to see it again.
So how would you kind of characterize the early start for SMU? Obviously, it's a new coaching staff, although he's very familiar with a lot of the players. He was just at SMU a couple years before. The 2-2 start, I mean, obviously beating North Texas and Lamar were probably expected. Going on the road's always tough with a new team, at Maryland, TCU, like you said, it was a grudge match that unfortunately for SMU ended the other way. What were kind of the expectations? Is SMU playing up to those, or it's still kind of a question mark where the team stands? How would you kind of evaluate the first four games?
I don't know that you can balance it against expectations, because I think there was a wide range of expectations. I think some people viewed this as maybe a 500 team, give or take a game. And then there are the eternal optimists who said, oh, sure, they can win 10 or 11 games. And the reality is probably somewhere in between.
Right.
And honestly, I think 2-2 is probably where they deserve to be. They beat the doors off of North Texas. I mean, everything they tried worked, and it could have been more lopsided than the score. Against Lamar, it was simply a matter of Lamar was outmanned. I mean, they came in and tried hard, and but SMU was bigger, stronger, faster, and quite honestly was a little bit lethargic and still beat them by 30 points.
Yeah.
And then they went up to College Park to play Maryland, and Maryland for the last several years has been one of those teams that you don't really know what you're going to get. And I think suddenly Maryland is pretty good, by the way. They're 3-1. Their only loss is by a touchdown at Michigan. They just beat Michigan State by 2 touchdowns. And they are big, and they are athletic, and they are fast. And Rhett Lashlee, just like Gus Malzahn, will never tell you that there's a good loss or a moral victory. That's just not in his DNA. But they played pretty well against a team that I think is going to win a lot of games this year. And then I think Maryland and TCU are both better than most people expected them to be this year. And so, the Mustangs certainly are disappointed to lose either or both of those games, but they certainly didn't get run out of the building in either one of them. And I think 2-2 is a fair start, but I don't think we really have an accurate picture yet of what this team is, because again, they've been rotating a lot of players.
Yeah.
They've been dealing with injuries. I think the story is still to be told, really.
Yeah, and even with UCF, it kind of mirrors a lot of what you said. It's kind of hard to know what to expect because they played two teams they were clearly superior to, and pretty much knocked the socks off of those teams between South Carolina State and FAU, and Louisville.
Right.
UCF's offense struggled against Louisville and really struggled against Georgia Tech, but it still got a win against Georgia Tech. Then you look at Georgia Tech and they beat. After making the coaching change, they beat Pitt, who was ranked in the top 25 on the road this past weekend. So, still kind of wondering, what offense is going to show up or how good this UCF offense is. But to kind of look at the matchups, SMU right now is number 9 nationally in total offense, averaging 506 yards per game. Mm-hmm. Number 6 nationally in passing offense. I believe quarterback Tanner Mordecai is 3rd nationally in passing yards and 4th in total offense. So tell us a little bit about Tanner. He's been starting for a couple years now. I know he was a transfer. Is he kind of hitting his stride? What's kind of the verdict on what kind of quarterback Tanner has been for SMU?
Tanner Mordecai, he's in his 2nd year of starting. He came in last year, got the job. And all he did in his first year was go out and set the American Athletic Conference record with 39 touchdown passes.
Not bad.
You couldn't have had a better. Yeah, nice debut, right? And he's a little bit deceiving. He transferred into SMU from Oklahoma, where he got locked in a numbers game, and he comes to Dallas. And when you look at him, he doesn't look very big, but he is about 6'2", 6'3". He's got a pretty solid arm. He's not going to throw a 90-yard Patrick Mahomes out of the building kind of pass, but he's got a strong arm. He can go 50 yards with some zip on it, and he runs better than you think he does. I swear, you look at him, it doesn't look like he's moving that fast, but every now and then he will turn the corner on a linebacker who's a little bit asleep at the wheel. And he is tough. He is really tough. Last week against TCU, he took a shot, and when he came off the field, he's wincing and he was in clear pain. I thought he might have been done for the day. It was like a shot to the ribs or somewhere in there, and the trainers are poking around at him. He was out one play, and he goes back in. You're going to have to drag this guy off the field to get him to not finish a game. And they have the luxury of a pretty talented reserve, a redshirt freshman behind him named Preston Stone, who is one of the most decorated recruits to come to SMU in years and years. So they feel awfully good with Tanner Mordecai, and they feel pretty good about the future with Preston Stone and Kevin Jennings and a couple other guys coming down the pipe.
Yeah, who are some of the other players I've seen to watch on offense? I know SMU, I believe, has the nation's leading wide receiver in terms of receiving yards. Who are some of the other players that, at least on offense, that UCF fans should be watching on Wednesday?
Well, the top receiver is Rashee Rice, and yes, he is one of the premier receivers in the country. And in fact, I talked to an NFL scout a couple weeks ago before the Maryland game, and was asking him what players he was interested in that day. And he said, well, the best player out here for either team is Rashee Rice. And he's got good size. He's fast, but he's also a very precise route runner, has outstanding hands, and he's another one who's got unbelievable toughness. If you get it near him, he will fight everybody in the building to go get the ball. Very, very tough, very strong. He's sort of everything you want in a wide receiver. They have a couple others as well. There's one of the guys who's played across from him, Jordan Curley, is a big, fast transfer from Arizona State a couple of years ago. He's been dinged up a little bit. I don't know if he's playing this week or not, but he is an extraordinary athlete. One of those guys who, when he gets in the open field, he could turn the corner and it's over. And then they've brought in a couple more transfers. Moochie Dixon came in from Texas. Teddy Knox from Mississippi State. So they've really stocked the wide receivers pretty well. At running back, they've gone through 4 or 5 already this year, just trying to find the right rotation. Trey Siggers is the senior who has started the games. And behind him, there's been a rotation. Velton Gardner transferred from Kansas, and he is really, really quick. Nice change of pace from Siggers, who's a little bit bigger and stronger. TJ McDaniel, a couple of years ago, had one of the most gruesome injuries I have ever seen. And a lot of people were convinced he'd never play again. He has come all the way back and been a nice part of that rotation. And then somewhere along the line, you're going to see Kamar Wheaton, who is a transfer from Alabama. He was one of the most coveted running backs in America a couple of years ago. And he just looks different. When he runs the ball, he can weave through traffic. He can turn the corner. He has incredible speed, like breakaway speed, leave the defense behind you kind of speed. And he is, he's still working his way into the offense. But at some point, I think he's going to end up being the guy. But at the moment, it's a rotation.
Right. I guess when you look at the other side of the ball, and some of these national stats, who knows what to think? Everyone's played different competition early on with FCS early, but SMU is ranked, I guess, nationally number 91 in total defense. On the defensive side, who are some of the stars, some of the players to watch that will probably be playmakers on that side?
I have 2 really outstanding defensive linemen. One is Elijah Chapman, who is mostly a defensive tackle. There are certain sub packages where they put him out on the end. And he's a guy who is one of the strongest players you'll ever see. I mean, he was setting all sorts of weightlifting records in high school, and that has continued. He took part in a pro day exercise or exhibition, I guess, where he did 10 more reps on the bench than the guy who had the most at last year's NFL Combine. Wow. But he's 5'11", he's 6 feet tall. In fact, a different scout told me last week, if that guy were 6'3", he'd be taken first or second day of the draft easy. He's unbelievably quick, very, very strong, and he's just not quite tall enough to meet all the measurables. But I tell you what, you're going to see him in the backfield a lot. The other one is DeVare Levelston, who is again, mostly an inside guy. Occasionally he'll go out to the end in different packages. And he's a taller, rangy a guy who he's a very good pass rusher, but he also holds up pretty well against the run. Those 2 are probably the heart and soul of the defensive line with some other pieces mixed in. They're linebackers. Jimmy Phillips is an outstanding athlete who's been there. I think it's his 5th year. Also drawing some NFL attention. And Isaac Slade Matalatia is a transfer from Oregon a couple of years ago who's really locked down one of the other spots. And then in the secondary, let's see, you've got, again, it's more about transfers. SMU's been very aggressive in the transfer portal. Nick Roberts used to play at USF in Tampa, and then he went to, I think it was Louisiana Monroe for a year, and he's been a really nice addition on the back end. And Chris Adamora is a transfer from Texas, one of half a dozen or something from Texas on this roster now. And so, I think the offense is ahead of the defense. The defense has some nice pieces in place. Their new defensive coordinator, Scott Simons, came over from Liberty, where he had a really, really strong unit. And it's not the most simple system that he teaches, so it's understandable that there's still a learning curve in place, but you see bits and pieces coming, and it's getting better week to week.
Right. So obviously, I mean, for Wednesday, I know there's a lot of question marks to just see how good both these teams really are, but for SMU, for them to win this game, what do you want to see? What do you think SMU needs to do well for them to be victorious on Wednesday?
Well, I think they've got to generate a pass rush, a consistent pass rush, because the SMU coaches are well aware that UCF rolls out a trap team on offense. The Knights are really, really fast at both receiver and running back. And the general thinking is if you can keep the ball out of the hands of those fast guys, that makes sense. Put the quarterback on the ground, but that's easier said than done. Obviously, Plumlee is a very good athlete who can get away from a lot of pressure. But they've got to try to generate some pass rush, hopefully force him into an errant throw here and there. And then offensively, I think they've got to establish the run in order to pull the UCF defense forward and therefore open up some space downfield. I don't think they want to get into a track meet. If this game ends up 70-68, I don't think that favors SMU. So I think they desperately want to run the ball, it's a lot of the same things you hear every week. Win the turnover battle, don't make any mistakes, win the special teams, generate a pass rush, and that obviously helps your coverage behind it.
Right. And before we go, I got to ask about conference expansion because obviously right now this will be the last matchup between, UCF and SMU, with UCF going to the Big 12. And, when you look at the teams that maybe didn't get the call this time, SMU is really one of those right there. And I know we hear a lot about the Pac-12, what's going on with that league. I know there's rumors about maybe more schools going to the Big 10. I don't know where that stands, but SMU's name has been pretty much out there in terms of, if the Pac-12 maybe takes San Diego State and SMU, what are you guys hearing? I know everyone's kind of on pins and needles wondering what may happen. As far as Pac-12, are the fans of the message board talking about that? What's kind of the buzz right now with SMU and conference realignment?
Of course, fans on message boards are talking about that.
Yeah, that's the number one thing. We know we've been doing it for 20 years. There's two things that get fans amped up. It's conference realignment and it's coaching changes. Those are the two hot topics always.
Exactly. Those will put bread on your table for years. We've heard the same things you have. We've certainly heard all the stories and read all the stories about Pac-12 rumors. There are a lot of people who have been quoted saying the Pac-12 would like to get into Texas, and certainly SMU offers that. It's one of the largest markets in the country. Whether that's true that the conference wants to get into Texas, I don't know, because obviously Pac-12 schools have come to Texas and recruited players before. Oregon has Texas players on its roster. USC, I know they're leaving, but USC comes and gets Texas players. The Arizona schools come get Texas players. So they can find their way to Texas with or without this move. But you certainly hear that. I mean, the most rumors I've heard are either Pac-12 or ACC. But if you cover a team or are a fan long enough, you'll hear just about every rumor out there.
You're right on that.
You may or may not remember SMU joined the Big East for about 5 minutes before the American Athletic Conference got off the ground. So I think, we can sit here and quote stories that we've heard and speculate all we want, and it might be entirely different by tomorrow or next week or next year. The real answer is I don't know. Those who are in the know have kept things very close to the vest. I think the Pac-12 makes some sense. I think there's a legitimate argument for the ACC. And I think there's a legitimate argument that they may stay exactly where they are. UCF and Houston and the rest are going to the Big 12. There are several teams coming into the American next year, Rice, UAB, Charlotte. So they will be filling out the slate of the conference there as well. I don't have a great answer for you because I don't think any decisions have been made yet.
Yeah, I know, just one of those storylines we're all following, and we see the Dennis Dodds and the Brett McMurphys every other day kind of put out something that's kind of vague and rumor, and we're not really sure what's happening, but I know the Pac-12, they're trying to negotiate a TV contract right now. So, I mean, if they were going to add teams and if they weren't going to lose any more to any other leagues, it would make sense to me anyway to, grab a San Diego State and a SMU. You can make easy flights into Dallas, Fort Worth for all your other sports. And I think there were some rumors, before, the Pac-12 started to fall apart a little bit, how I think it was the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, or maybe it was this time a year ago, they said that, TCU, could have been on the Pac-12's radar, but I think USC's president, or maybe USC kind of nixed any expansion moves, because I think there would have been an opportunity when the Big 12 was in turmoil that the Pac-12 could have taken some teams. I know they were interested maybe a little bit back then in getting into the state of Texas, but obviously a lot's happened since then. But Steve, I appreciate it. I've really enjoyed our conversation to talk a little bit about SMU UCF heading into Wednesday night. I know you're going to be at the stadium on Wednesday. I look forward to saying hello to you there, and have a safe flight. And thanks a lot, Steve.
Many thanks. I enjoyed visiting with you.
All right. Thank you.
I'll
Take care.
see you Wednesday.
I will see
All
you
right,
as
you
well,
too.
partner. Thanks.
All right.